Hey everybody, welcome back to Video Mess. So, today we're continuing this series. Is that an analog in your pocket? Or are you just happy to see me? And today we're having some fun by playing the demake and reimagining of Symphony of the Night for Sega Genesis on Analog Pocket. What this basically is, it's a reimagining of Symphony of the Night from PlayStation 1 and Sega Saturn, converted over to the Sega Genesis, and it runs in FPGA as well. Now, this is not a true remake of the game. It's a reimagining using levels from Symphony of the Night and assets to make a more 16-bit style Castlevania game. The developer Pigsy on this has done an absolutely outstanding job getting it to the stage that it is today, and I've been seeing previews for this all over the place. I thought maybe we would take a look, and it is great that it runs on Analog Pocket. We're going to be going through what the demo has to offer. There are two demos, one's more stable than the other, but both are going to be an absolute fun time, and seeing Dracula here just yell Sega at the beginning is one of the best touches of the entire demo. But it's wild to see something we are so familiar with, Symphony of the Night, running on the Sega Genesis, and I will say between the parallax scrolling, all of the sprite work and everything else, this looks absolutely incredible. If you didn't stare too closely, you'd have no idea this was running on a 16-bit Sega Genesis versus the 32-bit PlayStation 1 or Sega Saturn versions. Even this introductory area here, the castle courtyard, as Alucard would have come across the bridge when he rode in on the horse, it just looks outstanding in 16-bit, and with the screen filters over the top, it does have that nostalgic look everyone knows, loves, and remembers. But it's so fun to be able to take a look at these fan games like this, because while Castlevania Symphony of the Night's been played by basically absolutely everyone and their uncle, seeing it in a new light is a ton of fun, and I've loved the reimagining aspect of this, taking assets and level structure from the original game and making it feel way more like a 16-bit Castlevania, something like Bloodlines or Super Castlevania 4 or even Dracula X. If you never played that game, play it. It's not as bad as the internet would lead you to believe. But I love just how good this game truly works. All of the assets from the PlayStation 1 version, all of those frames of animation are just here. Alucard looks insanely fluid, especially for Sega hardware. You'll see his cape flowing in the breeze there. This is just some of the most impressive conversion work I have ever seen, and it comes from one of my favorite games of all time, which is just a ton of fun. For some reason here, that rock didn't break. It would break in the PlayStation 1 version, but of course this is just a Christmas demo. But it is just an insane thing to see, and we don't really get 16-bit Castlevania games anymore. Honestly, we don't really get much Castlevania in general, so fans are doing what Konami won't. Sure, if you're in Japan, there's probably some patchy slot machines out there with the Castlevania properties on them, but for the most part, we haven't seen a true Castlevania game in a very long time, which is super unfortunate. I just wish Konami would remember that they are a game company and start releasing more fun stuff for us. You'll see here that this doesn't seem to adhere to the same exact layout as we would remember before, and that's a ton of fun. We're actually finding surprising things here, and your expectations are definitely going to be pivoted from what you would know if you were just playing Symphony of the Night, and that is amazing. I love the overall art style and architecture and everything else in Symphony, so to see it reimagined here is just a ton of fun. You'll see Death floats in. We have that parallax scrolling of the clouds in the background going over the moon, and honestly, they look good in 16-bit. This is not going to be as visually impressive as the PlayStation 1, but the fact that this works whatsoever in its own right is a huge accomplishment. I love featuring videos like this on the channel, talking about what fans do when companies will not. Obviously, Alucard has the sub-weapon there as well. He's got his throwing knives, and Death's patterns here are a ton of fun. I do love those orbs he shoots out as well. Obviously, normally you would get a conversation with Death here in the game, and he would take away all of Alucard's supplies he brought to fight Dracula, so it'd be interesting to see as this demo goes on and gets more revisions what exactly will happen here. But that's the exciting part, being able to follow along with progress like this, because Pigsy the developer has been updating a lot of different YouTube videos and showing a lot of different previews of his work in progress, but this is one of the first times anyone gets a chance to actually check this out and play it, and it is definitely worth a playthrough. It's so intriguing to see such a familiar game played in such a different way, and you'll see here the Death fight is over. He's going to grab his chest there and float off. I'm really curious where Death ends up next and what his fight might look like in a demake of Symphony of the Night versus the original version. But the graphics, the movement, the sprite work, everything is converting so well to 16-bit here. It is so impressive, and I would say that the art definitely lends itself to having that screen filter applied. And the music pivoted to 16-bit is amazing as well. Listen, and I'll be right back. It's so interesting hearing such a familiar song played out of sound hardware that it's never really been on before, because the Genesis had very unique sounding qualities to it, and it definitely shines here on this demo. But let's pop that filter off and move around the game with a little bit more clarity on the screen. And that's the great thing about Analogue Pocket. Wherever else you want to play this game, you do have those options. And the graphics here and the artwork definitely do look good without the screen filter on, and I love that purple cloud in the background going over the moon. There's definitely some difficult jumps in this game. It's going to test you, but it wouldn't be a Castlevania game if it did not. You can see you can definitely move around the world in unique ways. And as we walk over this bridge here, it's going to crumble and send us down to another boss fight that is ripped clean from Bloodlines. If you don't remember this glass breaking scene, definitely check Bloodlines out. It's not as well known as pretty much every other 16-bit Castlevania game, and that is definitely a bummer because it deserves to be played by pretty much everyone. But I love the mixing of the old and the new here. Obviously, this area was not in the original Castlevania. This is Bloodline specific, so seeing something like that floor fall out from underneath you and going into a boss fight is just a very interesting thing to see. That's not anything that would ever be in the original Symphony. And as we move back to the entrance here, you'll see that you do have this little bit of a selection here. You can see all of the different information on the screen, and we're going to play through the beginning of the game without the filters to talk a little bit more about the art style. But again, I love projects like this. It gives Castlevania fans one more thing to experience when Konami, the company, just seems to absolutely refuse to give us anything new, even though we're basically begging for it. And you'll see there are two different versions of the ROM, one more stable than the other that's going to have a little bit less enemies on screen. But even with the filters off, I love these trees in the beginning and that parallax scrolling. You have three different independent layers, the two trees and the actual wall there, and it looks so good. Even these windows here, as we're scrolling by like you would in the original Symphony of the Night on PlayStation 1, have such a great graphical effect on Sega Genesis visual hardware. And that's the thing, the hardware that displays anything on a Genesis is completely unlike anything the PlayStation 1 or Sega Saturn have on board. So the fact that this even works in and of itself is incredible, let alone at a solid frame rate with all of these animations included within. The amount of technical wizardry to even get to this stage is mind-blowing, and I can't wait to see what this ROM hack brings next, because it's going to be a lot of fun to see how this progresses. And if you're interested, I will continue to cover this project over time, and when new updates come out, I will show you guys what's new, because in 2024 I want to do a lot of different fun things, talking about new experiences in retro gaming. I so often talk about games that have existed for 20-30 years, but I want to spend a little bit more time talking about the modern stuff that basically is retro in nature. But just look at the wall textures there. Sure, you get a little bit different of a color, but it still works within the world of Castlevania, and it looks so nice while it's doing it. You will see there's a little bit of a blue border at the top of the screen, and that basically mirrors what was going on the PlayStation 1 original as well. Sometimes you'd have a full screen of graphics, and sometimes you'd have these little borders at the top or bottom, depending on what the artists were going for when they were actually making the game in and of itself. And one more boss fight here with Death without those filters turned on. I actually think in some instances no filtration looks better on this demo. That moon there has a more poppy bright color because the screen filter effects, the scan lines, and the shadow masks do bring the color down ever so slightly, and I think seeing all of the brightness here works within context of the game itself. But this is just such a fun thing in general, and I'm so happy to see that it came to the Sega Genesis hardware and not Super Nintendo, because Sega had a very distinct visual look that was unlike anything Nintendo was doing. Even the Castlevania games on Super Nintendo versus Genesis had completely different colorways, and I would say the more horror vibe is coming across on Genesis than it would on Super Nintendo. But again, I absolutely love Symphony of the Night. It's one of my favorite games of all time. I still remember when I got my copy for my birthday back in the day, I fell in love with it, and I play it pretty much every year since. And generally I play the Sega Saturn version because I love playing as Maria, and from what the developer has said, some of the Saturn exclusives are going to come over to this, and there is going to be Maria as a playable character. Obviously that seems to be in the future, but that's the fun part about a project like this. It's going to have multiple revisions, it's going to have multiple demos, and you're going to get to see it grow within your own eyes. And that is always the fun thing about projects like this. Following along with the progress can be as much fun as playing the actual finished game. So the next time Castlevania updates, as far as the Symphony of the Night demake is concerned, I will do another video. But if you're looking for a fun new Castlevania experience, even if it's not finished, definitely check the demo out. It is absurdly impressive, and I'd love to see it. Short of that, I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.